Hey guys, welcome back to Swaggy Science Students.
Yay.
Yay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna grab your sheet. Let's go.
So today we're going to be talking about Chapter 15, Evolution.
Chapter 14's first, but good try.
Why is 15?
Because you did that.
So, fossil evidence of change is the first topic we'll be talking about. It's Earth's early history, okay? So we have land environment. The Earth formed approximately 4.8 billion years ago. The Earth that we live on. Gravity pulled the molten Earth into a sphere and heavy materials sunk into the center, creating the core of the metallic minerals in an outer core. Basically is how that worked. We had lighter silicate materials found in the upper and lower mantles and crust. So what we're walking on, you know, up on the outer part of the sphere. And the early Earth was established 4.6 billion to 3.5 billion years ago. It was toxic. Nothing lived on it. No free oxygen, precipitation, or life.
So we just died.
Yeah. So atmosphere. Early gases expelled by the outgassing of volcanoes kind of created our atmosphere, but we did not have any breathable oxygen, so not livable, you could say. Oh, still my turn. Sorry about that. Clues in rocks. Fossils. Fossils are any preserved evidence of an organism. So little rocks you find that look like they got little creature bones in it. That's a fossil. Most organisms decompose before fossilization, so we don't get a really good look of a lot of organisms. We just kind of get lucky sometimes and find some fossils of all sorts of different life, because most of them don't make it to fossil form. And they form in only sedimentary rocks, and the minerals are going to replace the organic matter to fill the empty spaces, which is how you get the outline look of the creature's bones.
And sedimentary rock is a layered rock, so you can see a different time period.
Right.
Seed.
So the people who study fossils are called paleontologists. I'm sure you've all heard of those. And
Ross Geller.
to date the fossils, we use relative dating. So that's comparing the rocks in other layers. And so it gives a ballpark estimate of the age. Okay, you know, if a fossil's under another fossil, lower in the ground, it's older. So
Now we'll be talking about the law of superstition. So older rocks on the bottom, younger rocks on the top. So when you think about it, the youngest rocks are here because they're like newer. They're on their top. The oldest ones have been there for the longest time, so they're on the bottom. And they keep getting pushed down. So radiometric dating uses radioactive isotopes to get an accurate age, so it's really accurate. The nucleus is unstable and it decays at a constant rate. We use the decay rate like a clock to determine how old a fossil, a rock, or an object is. So, clues in the rocks. So what are the clues in the rocks? So there's a geologic timescale that shows major geological and biological events that happened in Earth. So it shows like the different time periods by layer. So the Precambrian era, which was 80% of the Earth's history, was mostly single-celled life, and they can tell that by the fossils and rocks in that layer. The Paleozoic era, which was the Cambrian explosion, so major animal groups started to diversify, and there was all types of ocean life, so there was cell and primitive organisms. There was Ordovician and Silurian periods where fish and land plants and insects appeared, so mosquitoes and little grasses and, you know, perch and walleye. Probably not, but you're picking up on it quick now. There's the Devonian era, which was the first tetrapod, which was a four-legged animal, fish and amphibians. The Permian, a major mass extinction occurred where 90% of life at the time became extinct. So there's a major event where 90 out of 100 animals, let's say, died.
that's a lot of deaths.
And then there's the Mesozoic era, which is mammals, dinosaurs, flowers, and non-flowering plants. So, this is in like the Jurassic period. So birds evolved into predatory dinosaurs. The Tetrasaurus, which was 65 meters tall. An asteroid impact, which was on the Yucatan Peninsula, and mass extinction of dinosaurs. So
That's
this,
a lot of damage.
This asteroid did a lot of damage. I'll tell
Lots
you
of
what.
damage.
And then there's the Cenozoic era, where mammals became dominant to land animals and began to diversify. And that's like the area that we're in now, with intelligent life like monkeys and humans. I don't know if we're intelligent, but like whatever. And then, so the origin of life, the early ideas. So there's the spontaneous generation. So life arises from non-life forms, and this was in 1966. So, people thought like in a barn how like mice just like get infested in there. They thought, what if the hay in the barn gave birth to these animals? Like, think about it. Like, you're stupid. So Francisco Redi was a smart man and didn't believe that bullcrap, and he proved like flies come from rotting meat. Like, no, yeah. Anyway, so he did that experiment with corked and uncorked flasks. So the ones that were corked, they couldn't get anything in because they were enclosed and like the animal was coming from like an outside. And then the ones that were uncorked, they had maggots on it because it didn't have a top and they could get in.
So now we're going to be talking about the theory of biogenesis. That means that life comes from life. We discovered this in the 1800s. Louis Pasteur demonstrated biogenesis in bacteria. So he used an upright flask and a tilted flask, and the upright flask showed no bacterial.
Okay.
Alright. Primary energy sources for the chemical reactions would be like UV lights or lighting. Stanley Miller and Harold Urey stated that the basic amino acids could be made from inorganic compounds, making proteins. They didn't know if amino acids were bound to clay particles to form proteins. Genetic code. RNA's life's first coding system was discovered. Molecules to cells. Membrane formation is necessary. Next, we're going to be talking about cellular evolution. First cells. The first cell that was ever discovered was most likely the prokaryotic cell, and that has a nucleus. Photosynthesizing doesn't have a nucleus. Photosynthesizing prokaryotes evolved soon after the first cell was discovered. Endosymbiotic theory explains the origins of chloroplasts and mitochondria as organelles in the cell.
Yeah. So now we'll be talking about evolution. So, the Darwin's theory. So we'll be talking about the wonderful scientist Darwin. So Darwin, the beagle, was a beagle's naturalist. He recorded observations of plants, animals, fossils, and weather. Wow. So his voyage concentrated on the Galapagos Islands and the southern seas, so he focused his studies there. So some organisms Darwin found did not fit the area they were found in, like marine organisms on the mountain. Come on. So now we'll just be talking about the Galapagos Islands in general. So there's 4 islands, and it has its own variation. So if one island's different from the other, the different species on those islands will change to their environment. So Darwin observed that he thought that there were several species of birds, but there was actually one species, the finch, but it evolved and it changed to its environment, which was kind of cool in a way. So Darwin's study, so he hypothesized that new species could gradually go through small changes in ancestral species. So you can change over time, like let's say the bird was on a rocky island and he had to like break through a rock to get its food. Its beak would get stronger and stronger over time so it can survive. And Darwin's real world example was artificial selection, so breeding organisms for certain traits. So it provided, nature provided the variation. So like humans allowed selected organisms to reproduce. So in conclusions, if humans can change species, so can nature.
Natural selection. Okay, natural selection is the mechanism by which evolution works. There's 4 principles. Number 1, variation. Variation says that individuals in a population show variation. So, somebody has brown hair, somebody has blonde hair. Variation. Hereditability. Variations can be inherited. Many organisms have more offspring that can and will survive. So, I think we all get that one. And the last, final, number 4, is reproductive advantage. Variations that increase reproductive advantage have a greater chance of being passed on to the next generation. So they will live on to the next generation and pass their variation to their offspring. So in 1859, Origin of Species was published. It discussed evidence on natural selection and basically got this conversation started, right? So our support for evolution. Number 1 is fossil records. We have derived traits. They'd be newly evolved feathers, which do not appear in common ancestors.
Keep her going.
Ancestral traits are primitive features. They do appear in common with their ancestors. Ooh. Neat. Comparative anatomy is another way that we have evidence for evolution. Homologous structures are same form but used for a different purpose. They're inherited. Vestigial structures, reduced forms of functional structures. So basically, they had a purpose in ancient ancestors long ago, but they're useless now, kind of like what we believe the appendix to be. And analogous structures. They are different in form, but serve the same purpose. They're not inherited. And similar features can evolve independently. So, and number 3 of why we support the evolution theory is comparative embryology. Vertebrate embryos show similar structures and develop in similar ways during the first stages. They develop the same, they act the same as young. They're pretty close to adults, right?
Biogeography, a vocab word, is the study of the distribution of plants and animals. So we're going to be talking about adaptation. That's increases the reproduction success. So they're starting to adapt and get more used to their environment. Fitness is the contribution that one trait makes to the next generation. So examples would be camouflage, allows the animal to blend into the environment. Shaping evolutionary theory, so mechanisms of evolution, so population genetics. There's a gene pool and it's a collection of genes for traits in a population. Allele frequency is the percentage of a specific allele in a gene pool. Hardy-Weinberg principle is population is in genetic equilibrium. So all allele frequencies are the same in every generation. The following will change allele frequencies in populations. So the genetic drift will change. A genetic drift is a change in allele frequency due to change, so affects small populations. Founder effect is a small sample of a population becomes separated, so separated population starts fresh in a new habitat. The bottleneck effect is population declines to a very low number and then rebounds. So that's a result of a small gene pool, and that's natural disasters and disease often cause that.
Yes. So now we'll be talking about the gene flow.
Gene flow.
So this is immigration and emigration. So immigration is when you come into a new environment, and emigration is when you leave. So it increases and decreases genetic variation. There's non-random mating, which promotes inbreeding, also favors homozygous alleles, and mutations. Mutations are selected for if they are harmful. Mutations are selected against if they are to an advantage. So that's disgusting. So reproductive isolation. Pro-zygotic isolation. So it makes fertilization very unlikely. So during chromosome numbers, pH of females' reproductive tract to high and low, the parts do not fit together, etc., etc. Post-zygotic isolation. So hybrid offspring can connect reproductive because it is sterile, and hybrids may not develop correctly, making it less likely to reproduce. Types of natural selection. So stabilizing selection, with individuals with the average form of traits has an advantage for reproduction and survival. So extreme forms are at a disadvantage. So most effective in the population that is well adapted to it in its environment. Most common types of natural selection. That is the most common type. So the 2 is directional selection. Individuals with extreme form of traits has the advantage. Direction selection acts as a favor one trait. All other forms of the trait are at a disadvantage.
So population, it changes toward one extreme form that will eventually become the average. So it starts out it's extreme, but eventually it's just going to be the average form. Where did Aaron go? Okay.
Let's go to the bathroom. Keep going.
Disruptive selection. Individuals with either form of extreme trait are at an advantage because the average trait does not have what they have, making the average trait have a disadvantage. Populations change towards both extreme forms, and the average is just going to disappear. Sexual selection. The preferential choice of a mate based on a specific trait can be stabilizing, directional, or disputive. Usually females pick whichever male has the best form of the trait, so that way the best traits are passed on to their offspring. Speciation. So we have allopatric speciation. Allopatric speciation is a physical barrier that divides population. Whoa.
Okay, continue.
Populations will become more and more similar until they branch out into a new species. Then we have sympatric selection, speciation. Holy cow, speciation. Sympatric speciation is no physical barrier separates the species. Ancestral and new species live side by side, so the species that they originally came from lives with them.
So now we're going to be talking about patterns of evolution. First is the adaptive radiation. Adaptive radiation is one species gives rise to many different species in a short time. Coevolution is evolution of one species affects evolution of the other. 3 is convergent evolution, and that is unrelated species evolve similar traits. 4 is rates of evolution, and basically that means evolution proceeds in slow, gradual steps, or it can go followed by rapid spurts of change.
So that is it for chapter 14 and 15. I don't have my Birkenstocks today, so you're going to have to get moccasined.